Heather, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Great. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Rick Tainer. Here. Richard Yeager. Here. Sontag here. We have in Port from the planning office, and Linda Guthrie is taking notes. I'll go through the agenda. We are going to change the order of events and take the approval of done first for 1 Jefferson Street and 390R Paramount Street. Then we will have a continued public hearing for 24 Merrimack Street Market Park expansion, site plan review, after which we'll do approval of minutes and any other updates. So let's get going with the approval not required. You will have to speak, I believe, into the microphone.
How would you like this?
We'll have it on the screen, so that won't be an issue. But if you'd like to speak in the mic, that'll be helpful.
Good evening, members of the board, Andy Ford. My name is Edward Dixon, professional lawyer today with Hank Associates. I'm here representing the owner of the property at 390R, Kevin McGee, who is the purchaser of this piece of land that's being subdivided from the former Hadley Estate property. If you look at the plan, essentially you're creating a non-buildable lot that is going to be combined with Kevin's existing parcel, which is 390R. And that's where he gets the frontage and access to Merrimack Street. There is no non-conformance that I can be aware of on this. That's the map on the zoning table on the plan. The only thing that Kevin is trying to achieve here is to expand his view of the riverfront. If you look at the way it was before, he only had a tiny sliver going out to the river, where he has a little porch, and this now will give him an occupied space between him and the river, and he has a little garage that he keeps maintained. The Hadleys are fully on board with this project, and they're very supportive throughout the whole process. Okay.
Are there any questions? Andy, would you like to speak to that?
Just given that it's essentially swapping some additional land in yards, this is something that happens on a frequent basis. The office does recommend endorsement of the plan for the subdivision control law and the regulations the board has.
Okay, I will take a motion to endorse the A&R plan for 1 Jefferson Street and 390R Merrimack Street.
So
Alden, second.
second.
Okay, second, Rick. I'll take roll. Alden,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes,
Rick. Yes. Richard. Yes. Yes. So you have your A&R approved.
Thank you very much.
Endorse. We'll move then to the public hearing that has been continued from our previous meeting on Market Landing Park. There was a list of issues that the board discussed last time that needed to be addressed. And we have representatives from the applicant team here to address them. And so I'll hand it over to you to speak first.
Sorry, I'm just checking to make sure that our owl camera is streaming. Just pause for a moment. I just want to make sure folks can get a connection. Okay. So I'm Andy Port. I'm the project manager for the city. We have from Sasaki, Maren Braco, and Stephanie Krul from VHB, both consultants, part of the team actually, that are working on this project. They're going to do the majority of the presentation, but there are a couple of things I'll speak to here. Thank you both for coming in person. It'll make the communication a little easier. As you've seen, we have sort of mixed results from the remote meetings or hybrid meetings, we call them. So thank you for that.
Good evening. My name is Maren Braco. I'm a landscape architect and project manager at Sasaki. And today we're here to come back to you to go over sort of the comments that we've heard and provide some updates. So we'll just briefly review the project schedule and the feedback we received when we were here in August. And that includes updates to bicycle circulation and bike parking, vehicular circulation and parking, some updates on events and programming, topography and views, and then I'll hand it over to Stephanie Krul to speak to resiliency strategies and modeling.
Just note, I know previously I talked about the possibility aim, if we could, to look for a board vote this evening. Obviously, I don't think that's realistic or reasonable. You received some materials recently and you're digesting them. In particular, we want to review the changes that we've made to the plan to try to address some of your concerns. Also cover some areas where we couldn't quite make exactly what someone was asking for, but tried to address the concerns as best we could, and to cover some resiliency areas. So our request here is that as we have the discussion tonight, present to you and then hear your feedback, if we could get confirmation if there are any other remaining concerns or issues the board has, and look to a board vote on the following meeting, which would actually align with the opening of the DoD special permit for the architecture for the building itself, which we have generally for the site plan purposes treated as a separate project or item. It's being placed in a footprint, so to speak, on the plan. And we reviewed a little bit of that previously, but generally speaking, that is our request this evening, is to, after reviewing the list, to determine if there's anything else that you'd be looking for to satisfy the board here. We did hear back from on the stormwater management plan, for instance, which was one of the comments. We did hear back from the consultant, Steve Engler, who had provided the revised stormwater management plan. We're just waiting for the city engineer, John Arkwhite, to confirm that the report now addresses miscellaneous concerns for some tweaks in the report.
And just to recap, in our project schedule, we submitted 75% construction documents back in May, and we've been in permitting and review since then. And once we get through all of these series of public hearings, we'll be starting the 100% CD effort with the goal of doing bidding over the winter and starting construction in the spring.
And so, as you know, the city council's ad hoc committee and various other stakeholders that were involved in that process have put a fair amount of input into these plans. And so you see in the diagram a lot of process leading up to now. I just added or requested Sasaki add a footnote in here about the bulkhead project. And just as a reminder for anybody who doesn't know or maybe doesn't recall from prior reference, the bulkhead project was originally planned for this winter. So our plan was to do the construction of that temporary disturbance of any kind this season. It has to be done off season. It can't be done during the regular season because it's on the water side. There's a sturgeon restriction. So we're trying to basically fit it within that winter timeframe. So this project, partly due to the timing of the federal funding and some of the process that's involved to actually access those funds, we'll be postponing the project until the following season. So it'll be in that overlapping season. So we'll have a fair amount of coordination between the bulkhead project, the park construction project, and all the other activities that we try to do on our waterfront. So we'll as separate from the plan approval process, we'll be having a series of meetings internally to talk about the coordination. But because there have been questions about the bulkhead project and how it relates to these things, that's the time frame generally is the winter of 23, so next winter.
Great, so now we'll move into the feedback we received at our last hearing. Fell into a handful of general categories. So the first being bicycle circulation and bike parking. So we've looked at adding additional bike parking, particularly on the east side of the park. The city has shared the current bike racks that they are using, and we are looking to specify those. There is a concern about the widening the path at the shared use path where it meets the boardwalk, so to provide space for bike dismounting and to encourage people to walk through the boardwalk, and to also sort of just give a more generous entry to the boardwalk where there'll be a lot of pedestrian traffic. And then also looking at redirecting traffic from the shared use path into the parking lot and not into the future of the extension of the shared use path in the interim. There was a comment about revisiting the shared use path alignment. This is under the jurisdiction of City Council and Waterfront Trust. So the second bucket was on vehicular circulation and parking. The plan includes 2 EV spots, and the request was to look to make either additional spots or to make more EV ready. So you'll see we'll address that in the presentation. We've also looked at interim parking conditions after just phase 1 is built, and we have that ready to share with you. And then there was some comments regarding clarification on the circulation on the west parking lot, and looking at where the proposed parking lot meets the Waterfront Trust parking lot. The next larger topic was on events and programming. And so we provided an illustration that just shows all of the ways that we've considered how the park could support larger events. And then also thinking about shade structures that could provide a space for pop-up events in the Ferry Wharf Plaza. So a question on grading and whether or not that would obstruct views to the water. So we've added some sections and some views to clarify that. And then for resiliency, we have provided a memo ahead of this meeting with the presentation, and Stephanie will be able to speak to those issues. And so these are just to recap, this is the existing condition. So again, just as a reminder, we're working on the NRA parcel east and west. All of the Waterfront Trust area is existing to remain, and there's a few areas where we're coordinating with them to meet existing grade, which are hatched in red. And this is the proposed plan. I know you've all seen this recently, so I won't go into too much detail, but a couple of things to note here that we've added since our last conversation. The final surface treatment of the area near the dock storage, where we're anticipating that will happen adjacent to the harbor master entry. We know that there's been some concerns regarding what that surface treatment will be, and the city has requested that it not be lawn. And so we'll be developing the details and material strategy for that in a 100% CDs. And the other thing to note is there's been some comments and recommendations on site furnishings. And because this is a public bid project, all of the site furnishings will have alternates, and we're currently in the process of reviewing the phase 1 cost estimate. And so we'll have a better sense of where we've landed there, but taking into account the input that you've provided and costs and input we've received from previous stakeholders throughout the process. And so this slide summarizes the bike circulation, and I've called out here in those dark purple bubbles where we've made changes. So at the center of the park, along the shared use path, we have a extended area of paving on either side of the shared use path, and those will be plaza pavers, so it's distinct from the shared use path. It'll be seen as this area to dismount from the bikes. We'll add signage and to provide that sort of more larger, more welcoming entry into the boardwalk. And then we've added 8 additional bike parking racks, so 5 at the entrance near Ferry Wharf Way, and then 3 at the east side entrance to the shared use path. And then this is a zoom in of the west parking lot to explain a few changes that we've made here. at the top left, there was a concern that the shared use path right now, as it's currently designed, is directing people straight sort of into Tuscan Grill and that parking lot beyond. I know the intention is that the shared use path will continue and that there will be a connection, but we wanted to make sure that there's clarity in where people are walking while that shared use path terminates right there. And so we've looked at the grading and created a flush condition for as long as we can in this area where Andy's generously moving his mouse. We've added relocated boulders that are existing on site. So that provides a barrier to vehicular movement, but they're spaced about 6 feet apart so that someone could easily walk through with their kid or with a bicycle and be safely crossing there. This also highlights the widened shared use path, so you can see the distinction in the pavement there, and that's a 10-foot wide path and a 10-foot wide buffer at the end, and that tapers to meet the shared use path as it moves forward.
And if I could just add, I have the blow up of the black and white sheets on this as well as a separate PDF, but you can see here, if you can kind of pay attention to this little detail here, you can see we moved the granite blocks to make space for that. So I do have the photographs of that area in case there's any questions, but in that area, we basically pushed the blocks out further to make this space wider. And that was something that I think Rick had brought up at the prior meeting to make sure there was space for the dismounting here.
And then EV parking. So we have 2 EV spaces dedicated. Those had been documented in the 75% set. We've coordinated with our electrical engineer to make sure that we can provide conduit running along that full East Bay so that all of those spots will be EV ready. So that means that we'll have 14 additional spots that could easily be converted to EV in the future. And then the last piece on this is just the concern that as people were driving out of this parking lot into the Waterfront Trust property, that there may be some confusion as to which way to direct the car. So we've widened the drive aisle here and maintained that existing pedestrian pathway in granite stone. And then there's 18 feet distance between that pedestrian pathway and where we've added in a stop sign and pavement striping to indicate that cars should stop, and then there would be a directional traffic signal there, or sorry, signal, but sign. And so this is just a revised vehicular parking, noting everything that I've just covered in just a larger diagram. So you can see the 14 EV spots. And maybe if you zoom into this area here, it's a little bit easier to see in the graphic. So we've added that the pavement striping to clarify that direction there. And so these next 2 slides are to address the question about interim parking during phase 1. So this diagram simply shows the proposed plan overlaid on top of the existing plan. So you can see because of that extension to the ways, we are cutting in to the existing parking lots in phase 1. And this shows an interim conditions parking proposal. We've managed to keep roughly about the same parking spots as will be in place when the full parking lots in phase 2 are constructed. So we're very close. I think it's for the interim conditions, we'll have 166 spots total. And then in the proposed, we'll have 167.
And I would just note visually, of course, these lots that are remaining for phase 2, because there isn't the funding for it right now, will essentially be smaller gravel lots. There might be some utilities, obviously we've installed there, subsurface, and so forth, but basically it'll be the gravel lots reduced in size, and we'll of course be landscaping to the edges as best we can based on the available budget.
And so this is a diagram to illustrate events and programming and how the site will be used during a large scale event. So obviously there's the existing stage on the Waterfront Trust property, where we imagine a lot of the larger events will take place. We've included event delivery and loading area where you could fit 3 larger trucks within the east parking lot, where the cursor is. Realize it's maybe a little bit hard to read there.
You can just see my hand there, yeah.
Yeah. And then we've also included a zone of reinforced turf. So this will look like lawn on the surface, but is vehicular grade so that you could, trucks could drive up to this area for loading, unloading. This could also be a space used for food trucks, but it just provides that additional flexibility for future events. We've also shown where sort of diagrammatically where tents could be laid out both in either plaza and in the lawn space adjacent to the harbor master entry drive. And then just noted where the electrical distribution panel will be relocated. And so these 2 slides speak to the question around topography and views. And so this is a section we produced very early on to show the concept of grading for this project site here. And what we really wanted to do with that lawn space right up against the water is to take the height of the existing berms where those pine trees are along the boardwalk and meet that existing and sort of just keep that level so that when you're on that lawn, it feels continuous and that you're sort of elevated a bit to get those views out to the water. The height, sort of the high point of those berms are at 13.5 elevation. When you're at the plaza or shared use path, you're at 13 or 13.37. So as you can see, you'd be able to stand on the path and certainly see over that landscape. And we also have a view that we can show in the next slide. And so if you notice sort of the eye level, I'm 5'6", I'm sort of the average human height. I could stand on that shared use path and see out to the water. And that's been the intention there.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Stephanie Krull. I'm a senior resilience and regulatory advisor at BHP, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about our resilience strategy and what kind of modeling we use. So initially, to come up with the projections that we wanted to use for this project, we looked at 3 different sources for the year 2070. The first one was the Newburyport Climate Resilience Plan, where 36 inches of sea level rise is contemplated. And the way that this was mapped at the time of the plan was to simply add 36 inches to the base flood elevation of the currently effective FEMA map. So the base flood elevation ranges from 12 to 13 NAV across the site. And so the Newburyport Climate Resilience Map adds 36 inches to that and maps out the resulting potential impact of a 1% annual chance flood in 2070. We also looked at what the Newburyport Wetlands Regulations based their sea level rise analysis on for their land subject to coastal storm flowage regulations. And they used the Boston Harbor flood risk model, which contemplated 40 inches of sea level rise by 2070. And then next slide, please. The third thing that we looked at was the newer Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, which models 50 inches of sea level rise by 2070. And that is based on a very high level of emissions. Well, it's a very low probability event with a 0.5% chance of exceedance in any given year. This is the model that is used by the Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management Office, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So it's 4.2 feet. And this is kind of what they've selected statewide for everyone to use as a planning number. So this MCFRM, Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, is different than the FEMA modeling in that it accounts for various coastal flood processes. It also provides flood depths in a mapping form. And the sea level rise itself is inclusive of Antarctic ice sheet melt. So it's including a few more geological processes than some of the other previous models. Interestingly, and I'm not showing it up here on the screen, but under current conditions, it shows a smaller flood extent and depth on the site than so, but it's actually in the future, these are the different flood depths for the 1% annual chance flood in 27. So you can see that most of the site is in. So to inform the site design and building elevations, we actually used a combination of information. So we used a bathtub model. This is information produced by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's sea level rise. This is mean high water. So this is the high tide, and they just incrementally added up to 6 feet of sea level rise. So we're looking at the area that is the mid-range orange. It says +4. That's approximately what tidal flooding would look like in 2070, barring any implementation of any resilience measures. So that would be the daily high tide would come up to that level. So we use that to inform the grading so that, and that's why, as Maren showed, that there's some topographic sloping on the site so that there's a higher gradient filling up some of the low points on the site. So this would avoid tidal flooding through the year 2070. We also used the NCFRM and the state's climate resilience design standards tool to select the appropriate target year for planning based on the type of facility that this is, including its vulnerability and its criticality to the public and to life safety. So that tool tells us to look at, actually for the park, to the year 2030 and use the 5% annual chance flood. And for the visitor center to look out to the year 2050 and use the 2% annual chance flood. And so we looked at that information, and that happened to be a little bit lower than the 40 inches of sea level rise that Conservation Commission guidance requests. So we actually went with the Conservation Commission and looked at for elevating and flood proofing the visitor center, looking at 40 inches of sea level rise. So that is what dictated the height of the surface of the first floor elevation, which is 15.3, now D88. And that provides adequate protection along with the other measures, such as the ability to lift the building higher and move it in the future. So that's how we come up with our resilience.
Thank you. So do you have any questions for us or defer to the chair? How you'd like to handle it from here?
Let's open it to the board to respond to what you heard first, and then anything else that may have come up since the last meeting you'd like them to speak to. Happy to open it up. You may have covered this previously, but I just wanted to know, was there any discussion about bike sharing companies in terms of a third party and the accommodations for that? Or no?
There hasn't been for this particular project. There was several years ago, we had some of those companies come in.
Do we at least have the infrastructure put into place so that it 20 years out, it's not going to be a major project to put that in?
I would have to say it's so much of an unknown right now as to how that went and how that would be integrated based on experience. I guess what I would say is this is, first of all, the parking areas are already a couple of years, a year or two out already, just because of the lack of available funding right now. So I think we have sufficient time to consider if that gets momentum in it to incorporate those, but right now we're not planning for it. We even several years ago, a number of years ago at this point, had some of those folks in, and there wasn't a decision at that time to engage, or to bring them in at that point. It was partly on their end, but partly on the city side. So I just don't know, although it hasn't been brought up in relation to this specific project on Market Landing Park. It has been discussed in the city. It's not clear yet exactly how we would integrate that here properly without knowing that it's going to, be useful this far out. So I would suggest that we consider that for the parking areas, but if that opportunity shows itself, roll it into the parking lot at that point before we get to construction, essentially, I guess would be my answer based on what we know right now.
I would think adjacent to the visitor center might also be a good candidate, and that's probably even farther out and would likely have easy utility access there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on some of the changes that were made due to our comments and so forth. I do like the additional bike racks. I think that looks good. And the traffic flow signage there, I think definitely will help. I found that the topographical cross sections are a helpful addition, getting sense of that. One question I had, it shows where the relocated electrical panel was, and I was just wondering, if it's moving it closer to the river than where it is currently, is there a risk of a higher risk of flood there, or it is a fairly high piece because it's on the berm? I'm just wondering if that an increased risk.
It'll
Right.
be designed
raised.
to be raised, yeah, to be above the flood elevation.
The other question I had was in the east parking lot, there's that center island of landscaping, and it looked like on the map that's got some grading there. Is there a berm there in the middle of that?
I think we're actually talking about is the landscaping to deal with some of the stormwater, right? So it's, does their cross section cover that, or is that?
Cross section.
I think it cuts that off.
Yeah, it doesn't show that.
It is, I believe it's slightly mounded actually, and all the stormwater is being directed towards storm drains. But it's pretty subtle. It's like
So it's just a slight amount just for the drainage.
Yeah, if you want to bear with me, I can pull up the black and white plans, but I think you'd see them as the relatively small contour changes. I can, if there's another question, I can pull those up.
The other concern I have is again, with the parking behind urban elements, the reserved spaces there, and in the current setup, there's either 9 or 10 reserved spaces.
Right.
And it looks like in the plan and even in I wasn't sure in the temporary reassignment of the parking, are there still those reserved spaces?
Yeah, as far as we can tell, that's an obligation we're to maintain. So we would be basically just reconfiguring them, and that's all. We would not be
More spaces where your cursor is, and then they continue along the side.
along the side here. Correct. Yeah, we would not propose to take away into the spaces that have been committed to in there. I think we're on record, via an easement. So
And those spaces were in the count totals.
correct. That's part of the count. Yep.
Page 11.
Yep.
I'm not sure that those totals actually worked out quite exactly right. Maybe a couple spaces off. I mean, the temporary phase 1 to phase 2. Kind of thing, but
Okay.
it's only a couple spaces. I'm not sure if the numbers didn't quite add up.
Okay. We can flip that or take a look.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's it for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Nick, you want to go next?
Sure, thanks. So I was originally thought that I'd like questions this time. And I still have some. So on your bicycle circulation and parking slide, still shows the shared use path going through the individual area. And that's not the proposal, right? The proposal is bicycle, people walk through it. So I guess I was just kind of shared use path for bicycles. And I guess,
Sure. The diagram may show a red line here, but to your point, the black and white drawings do indicate that folks are not riding their bikes through there. Sure.
Yeah, the asphalt ends and it meets.
Sure.
the
We could
sidewalk.
white this out and you'd be correct. That would be more accurate.
Mhm.
Correct. Sure. Yep.
And I still have a concern that people walking that's an ongoing issue. The 8 bike racks that are at 5 and 3, the west end of the, nope.
Oh, yeah, this one here.
No,
Oh, sorry.
the west end is like this. Yeah. So those appear to conflict with the 3 service vehicle spaces. And I just wonder whether those bike parking spaces are actually going to be available at major events, because you have those threes, that's a place where you've got people dropping off stuff. Picking for vehicles actually, sitting there. There's another image that we have, showing the service vehicle. And so I don't know whether, I guess I just asked you to make sure that those 8 spaces are actually usable when you've got trucks. And they're around.
Yeah, so hopefully the black and white drawings here help to clarify that. So the bike parking was, yep, there, and then within that concrete area. So
It looked different in the presentation. That's part of the problem. When you compare the presentation slide that shows the service parking and the presentation slide that shows the bicycle lanes, they're right behind the hatch line area. So that's why I was. I just wanted to make sure.
Gotcha. Sorry for the confusion. It's probably just because it's such a small scale and yeah, the living
Well, I think
probably
it will
isn't
be
as hard
hard
to.
to see.
Yeah.
I was disappointed that the original part, we talked about trying to get the contracts as close as possible to where people want to be, or where people are liking. And those, especially those 5 are, nowhere, it's not a destination there, and nobody's going to buy there. So I would repeat my suggestion from last time, that you convert a couple of parking spaces, get rid of 2 parking spaces, and that, and there's 12 parking spaces. But I know that vehicles have a bigger constituency than bicycles. It's a hard point, I'm going to keep saying that. Over on the east side, where you say there are 3 additional bike racks. So just want to clarify, so you've got the existing 3 at Custom House Way, and you're adding 3 more here.
Correct. On the other side of the, correct. Yeah. And sorry, certainly understand your concern or your suggestion about the bicycle parking, potentially in lieu of vehicular parking. Unfortunately, we did, of course, hear the sort of usual concerns and feedback, both from the parking clerk and the Waterfront Trust in particular. Not too keen on, the further reduction of the vehicular parking. We did, and, Sasaki looked at the viability of putting the racks in based on the other site, grading and distance and equipment being put in. And so this is where we sort of ended up with that. We tried to provide a few at the beginning of the trail there, like you suggested, but I guess there was a sense that there wasn't quite enough space in there to squeeze those. I'll defer to Sasaki in that design end, but
I guess, just want to say, you better have very healthy trees. You take them changing the bikes. You have to ride bicycles where people want to park. People want to park.
right, I think our assumption is that when people come to the park on their bike, but then they'd quickly get off, right? It's like ideally this is a space that's more geared towards pedestrians and events and people walking. And so we tried to provide parking spots around the periphery.
Just want to point out that the bike racks at the library or in the back alley, people chain their bikes. That's the same thing that's going to happen. So, I do think it's short-sighted not to plan for bicycles, for bicycles. But, we're putting cars where cars want, but not bikes. But I've said that enough. I'm not going to pull it in.
But I would like to add a follow-up question because I'm not clear. Are people actually going to be biking along these ways to the water or the wharf paths? So we're not just looking at bicycle parking off the shared use path. We expect that people will be biking along the ways where these other bike racks are.
actually, to your point, and maybe to clarify, the Waterfront Trust, where I would expect the same Waterfront Trust policy, although right now we have city ownership in the east and west lots. The Waterfront Trust has a policy that those are pedestrian only on the boardwalk. I suspect that there'll be now or in the future a concern to sort of request to sort of maintain this as a pedestrian path, meaning that folks might be walking there. I don't necessarily have an objection if there isn't a whole lot of traffic or pedestrian traffic, but I find it more likely that the policy would be to encourage folks to walk in these stretches that are perpendicular. Whereas the shared use path, other than the central embayment, is something where you'd be expected to ride your bicycle straight through. It's obviously a question of what the Waterfront Trust and city policy is or will be in the future. But these pedestrian walkways, for instance, if you look at Summerbee's Way, the Custom House and so forth, we do see folks, that ride their bikes through there. But I think, there may be a concern or a policy preference generally for those to be pedestrian driven rather than truly shared, like the shared use path going east and west, which has a 10-foot asphalt.
Well, that just reinforces what Rick is saying. Nobody is going to be coming near those racks with bicycles. So it's a waste to even bother putting in there. If that's the case.
Well, I'll just speak for myself. I'm not sure that I would agree with that only because well, it's certainly some folks may have to walk a few feet to get there. There are avenues for folks. They might be coming through the parking lot, reaching those. I do agree with the idea of having them around the perimeter. We can take a look. We're having another meeting tomorrow. We can take a look and see if there's anything else we can, squeeze in on the perimeter here. But we're just running into some site constraints there, but we can have discussion about that. We're trying, as Mary was saying, to put them in as best we can around the perimeter where folks are coming in on their bicycles. And this is sort of where they ended up, but we'll take another look.
And I'll
Okay.
just point out that in this area around Ferry Wharf Plaza, there is about 3 feet of grade change. So there's steps and seat walls in that area. Yeah, there. So, we looked at putting bike racks there, but it seems like we'd be forcing people to either walk around and in front of the swings or navigate steps. So it didn't seem to be an appropriate place for bike parking.
That wasn't what we were proposing. What we're proposing was in the parking lot, that, right northeast.
Right here. Yeah.
I know we're not real big on signage, but you might consider some signage at the two ends of the shared path, where there are limited number of bike racks, or sending people to other sites where there is additional bike.
Yep. We can do that. We can even, I think, I'm trying to think of the example of this. I know we've seen what we have here in Newburyport, but we can even have a small diagram added to the sign just to let people know, quick reference how to get there, where they are.
And I'd like to see that on.
Sure.
So with respect to the electric vehicle, EV ready, just want to make sure that you're using the terminology. It's terminology. So EV ready means that there's a panel, there's a conduit and connections that can be made in the future, install a charging station. As opposed to maybe EV capable, which would be just providing the panel and conduit, just providing the cable and the wastewater, but not the conduit. But I just want to make sure that when you say EV ready, that means you're installing the conduit and the connectors for future charging stations.
Sure. I'm not the electrician, but what we're planning on doing is, and again, we're coordinating with Molly, who's our recycling and energy coordinator, sustainability coordinator, who's been doing it with these chargers for a while with David Sink, the electrician. At any rate, our plan is to do the first two as level 3 chargers, which are higher than the ones in the garage initially. And to do the rest of the bay with running the conduits themselves. I'd have to defer to the electrician on whether it makes sense to pull wires right now or that sort of thing, but we are trying to make sure that the visitor center itself can provide all the power from the panel once those lines are, assuming it's the same cables essentially going out there. So our plan is definitely to put all the conduits in place along that bay. And of course, there is time, given the time frame of the project, if there's additional desire to add more, we can do that. But given the budget and given feedback we have received from the parking clerk, the Waterfront Trust and others about, and Molly and others about the actual usage, the trajectory, so to speak, it seemed, worthwhile to add in a whole bay here, but not necessarily to run empty conduits around the entire parking lots, all the spaces, so to speak. So that's, essentially what our plan is to run the conduits, but not necessarily to run the cables. That we can check with the electrician if that's something worth doing, because it won't be different cable, but we are planning on making sure that the power is there to essentially supply that.
So then I guess I would say that when you talk about the revised plan for the next meeting, that you show, maybe take off, to be ready.
Okay. Okay.
And really show what you're proposing to do.
Okay.
It means something.
Okay. If it makes sense to run the cable, we can add that to the plan. I think we just want to check to see whether that, just to make sure we're not.
It's a lot cheaper to do it now than
Yeah.
to do it.
Sure. Sure.
I'm sorry. It's a lot cheaper to do it in a couple of years. When you do this.
Right.
There's still, one of the things we said last time was look at the number of short-term parking spaces for the visitor center in Richmond. It's still only 1 year. Question, whether you look at it, decide.
Yeah, what I had talked with the parking clerk and the waterfront trust, and this is, the preference is to keep it here for now. This does not preclude in the future the need or the ability of the parking clerk with input from the city council and others to make adjustments to the programming, so to speak. We're not necessarily covering all aspects of the programming of the parking lot, for instance, but we are trying to accommodate the initial inputs. So this is still what the sort of preferences, as we understand. But we also understand that may be flexed over time, especially based on increased demand or feedback from folks. They'd be looking to swap out a sign or add a sign to make just the changes you're talking about if they deem it right, essentially, or timely.
What is the pathway from the ADA space to the visitor center? Is it a continuous accessible space? From the parking space over to the central walkway and then around?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not an architect, so, but
So that is,
got an idea of coming up this ramp here to get up to the plaza here.
I think he's also asking about this spot here. So this is all flat.
Yeah, sorry. So this is flat going in this direction. This is right. So this is a staircase right here. And then obviously this route here, the pedestrian can come up here. Correct.
There's one plan in your new slides, there's one plan that shows three service parking spaces. And another slide that shows an event delivery and loading.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I think I just used service as a general category in the larger parking diagram. But it is intended, there was a special request during our stakeholder meetings when we had specific review for vehicular access and for events, that those three areas be specifically loading and delivering for events.
On one of your plans, one of the illustrations, you point to, I think, 3 alternates for the swing area. And it says they'll be shown in 100%. So does that mean we're not going to see them?
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, what I had talked about with Sasagi is, essentially, as designers, they might specify something that's the perfect product, right? Because we're a public, entity, we have to do public bidding. We have to provide alternates as part of the state statutory or regulatory process for procurement. So we provide alternates. They're comparable, examples. The bidder, we can sort of take it from there with the bidder and wrestle with them sometimes if we're trying to press, for the right one. But we have to provide alternates during the bid. One of the discussion points that came up was because as we were discussing with the city council, the budget for the project and the desire to do the base or the frame, of this project first, and then prioritize the areas for donations for site elements that would be, real tangible elements that people could, see and be potentially more interested in funding than say, subsurface utilities. We were looking to the actual cost of each of the individual elements. And so where some of the swing elements with the structure and the swing itself would be upwards of $50,000. I had asked them to look at, sort of sharpen the pencils, look at other alternatives for that. We'd also looked at, for instance, the timber structures that are on the rail trail just off the way here, over by by Oldies here. Examples like that that would be like a $10,000 installation as opposed to a $50,000 installation. So what we were trying to illustrate here was not that there won't be swings there or the elements that have been discussed. And there was a discussion since your last meeting. We talked with others about changing the swing elements which were deemed to be really integral to the park design right from the get-go. This sort of experience here, there was a preference for keeping this rather than say turning those into pavilions or overhangs of structures of some type for adaptive use. We thought, of course, and there was an agreement amongst the stakeholders that we could still do that in other areas, as Maren mentioned. That we have these tents shown. There are lots of other areas where those things could happen in a more informal basis when needed. So the swings were felt to be integral, but because of the limited funding, we're looking at alternates for the swing structures themselves. Same experience. It's just a question of what model essentially is installed. And we're just trying to basically make sure we can extend our dollars as far as possible while still getting the best possible outcome. So I don't know if that answers your question, or if there's more of a nuance, but
I thought, responding to the comments of a couple of residents made about replacing the screens with kind of permanent shade structures so people can get out of the sun and watch the.
Yeah.
Something for protection for elements rather than having a structure.
Yeah, sorry. So not to conflate two things, there are two separate issues, I guess. One was the sort of agreement and consensus that we should stay on track with the swings, that they're really integral elements to the park experience, and they were expected to be used very frequently. Whereas the pavilion type structures, depending on events and what it's used for, it wasn't 100% certain how frequently that might be used. There was also a possibility of placing these temporary structures and elements elsewhere, throughout the park when needed for larger events. So in essence, this is why, of course, the swing elements are streetler as opposed to a pavilion type structure. We did get an example, a great example, we looked at that. Putting structures like that just wasn't deemed as much of a priority as putting the swing experience and those seats. But at the end of the day, we have the ability to have other temporary structures as needed for events. And that's one way of addressing it. Basically, the tents, for instance, is one way of addressing that. There would be the ability, of course, to modify this park, over time, again, coming back to the board if the city needs it for various reasons. But this was not to change the selection of the site elements to go in there. But there was also a discussion separately as a separate track issue, the discussion of alternates so that we could achieve the same experience within budget.
I don't think anybody was thinking about temporary. Permanent things.
Correct. Yeah, and keep in mind, although the trellis structures of these swing structures are being somewhat transparent with the sort of framing essentially there has been some discussion or concern about structures in the past, and that was another point of feedback we got in between, the last meeting from some of the stakeholders was this issue of if you add a pavilion type structure, you have a roof, a canopy, so to speak, that might be perceived more of as a structure, somewhat inconsistent with some of the dialogue we've had previously, depending on your interpretation of the ad hoc committee and the council's input to date. So there was a little bit of concern about heading in that direction for that reason as well.
So just to follow up on that, what you're saying is it wouldn't be advisable to add some sort of a cover on that trellis, to change it.
Well,
By
then.
the council?
The idea was a sense of transparency, and the concern is that if we're putting a roof over that, even though, one might try to argue that's a plane, that the more we're blocking, this issue of blocking views has come up repeatedly on the waterfront. So from that perspective, if you're further back and you're seeing a wall there and it's a whole canopy, two reasons, a couple of reasons, but that reason, the reason of folks feeling like this element would be used all the time by folks, and whereas the pavilion wasn't 100% clear what the programming would be, who would cycle through, how frequently would it be used in one way versus another.
Another structure, just something like a sailcloth or canvas
Hmm.
across the top of the trellis. It could be, conceivably, if you're really worried about it looking like a closed structure and that goes against some other regulation, it could be rolled back. So that
I
when
like
you're
the
sitting on
canopy
street,
sail sort
while
of that,
you're on the swings, you're in the shade, and so you've got dual purpose of the same structure without thinking of a separate one like a pergola or a pavilion that would be totally closed and would get in the way of people seeing and moving around. But just a simple cover on the top of what's already there,
Hmm.
if that could be part of the acceptable regulation,
Gotcha.
it would provide some
Okay.
shade.
All right. We'll take a look at that. See if there's anything we can do. It's sort of an in between, so to speak. Maybe something that, like you said, is a canvas or a canopy of some type that could be retracted might be preferable to something that's, a permanent or hard structure of some type. So.
On the west parking lot detail that we have. So just kind of zoom in on that area where that part of the picture. This is just a question for me. So the symbology here shows one symbol for going through, and there's another symbol for this kind of brick shape. I know it's not brick, it's some that kind of symbol. Does that just refer to the strength of the pavement? And I guess in other words, if you're riding the bike along here, or walking, when you see a change as you move from the path into the road, it's the same top surface, asphalt surface, with a different structure underneath, or would it actually be different structure? And the reason I ask that is, if it actually looks good, it may not serve the purpose of showing.
I got you. Your concern is that maybe we should provide more of a cue, say, same treatment of material to,
Because I just didn't know what it is. I think
Yeah.
that it's referred to as a fee, it refers to different.
right, these are pavers and that is asphalt, to your point, yeah. So I guess maybe you're suggesting that we possibly extend asphalt here. Yeah. Okay. I have no issue or objection with that myself. I don't know, from our perspective, I think it's just a detail adjustment in that area, so I don't see that it's much of a problem. Gotcha.
Would also be. Just in that one. Just in that one little area where the transition.
Yep, gotcha. Okay.
The section through the topography section. Yeah. One of the understands that maybe. If you can zoom in, right, with the 13.0, 13.7. Yeah, but, so, that makes it look, it makes it look like that is higher than the area leading to the inches, is that? his interpretation?
No, and where the section is cut, that is correct. This is what I was referring to as the grade change. From this point, the shared use path slopes down to meet the boardwalk, and that's where you have that grade change. So then the plaza becomes higher than the shared use path.
And you can kind of see in the background here, a little bit of that stepping back here, but as Mara mentioned, you wouldn't necessarily have it right where the cross section is. It's a little bit more flush here, so it basically tapers towards the embayment up.
Well, and also, because I wonder what the fact is higher than assuming that's just that particular point, and things are going, the swinger is going.
Correct.
And then my last two questions, have to do with and I was just curious, I read the book report carefully and got confused. So and you mentioned it tonight. Why does the Massachusetts projection of the scenario, which is a 50-inch increase, why does that show a smaller flood extent than the FEMA plus 40? I just didn't understand.
No, I'm sorry, it shows a smaller extent for current flooding. Oh, so you're saying in here, why does it show a?
You said it shows smaller flood extent than FEMA plus SLR. So FEMA plus SLR is FEMA plus 40, and MC firm is something plus 50. So I just didn't understand.
So it's not a straight addition thing. It has to do with the MCFRM actually takes different ocean dynamics into account than the FEMA does. So FEMA is looking at, it doesn't have the detailed topography that was used for the MCFRM. It includes, like it doesn't include wave runoff, but it includes different things in the modeling. And so it's not just an additive.
And then my last question is when you get to the point of daily title, which I don't remember when that is, but how will that affect the condition of the paved surfaces and such?
So if you could go back,
You want the site plan or?
forward 2 slides. So this figure is showing current conditions, current topography with future mean high water elevations. What it's not showing is the change in topography that will result from this project. So there actually won't be daily flooding on the site because of the project. So it's going to
all the
avoid.
paths are going to be raised above that level.
Right. Exactly. So this is what we're avoiding.
Is that, because I need to look more carefully at future elevation.
Yeah, so between site grading and the bulkhead project, so these are all things that are going to eliminate tidal flooding to an extent. There'll come a point when once you get to 6 feet, before that point.
Thank you for acknowledging.
Sorry.
Anyone else? Heather, do you have anything?
Just,
Jamie, yes.
yeah, can you hear me? Okay, good. Can't tell.
You can tell if it's green.
Okay, good. Oh, it's not.
No, push on the power, and
Testing.
you can't hear anything, you just have to see it's green. And then you're going through the system, Heather and the recording.
Very good, thank you. So all my comments were addressed already by others, but the trellis kind of triggered a new thought in my mind, like to the extent it's controversial, I think it only makes it more imperative that we have it well defined at the approval phase. And I'm curious, so I have a question, that's a comment, but the question would be like, I would imagine the entire thing is a product that you have to get 3 separate product options for. I would think some aspect of it is custom, get 3 bids for a custom product. So I think some aspect, the swing, the actual sitting part of the swing and the components, those are products. But I would think the trellis would be something you could design with some specificity that we could approve, because I think that's just too important an item to leave to some down the road.
Sure, sorry. I'll defer to Maren if she wants to speak on from the designers or the teams end, but there are some complexities to this. I would suggest just in general, rather than expecting or being able to, as a board, specify the exact product, the certain parameters for maybe what you're looking for. So for instance, if we're talking about, integrating the swing elements, we can reference that. And I guess we don't want to create a problem where we're going out for just under the procurement laws, going out there, we have to basically provide substantively what we're looking for there, some alternates, vendor alternates. They can, of course, even come back with a submittal of their own to suggest that it meets the criteria. But we have to basically demonstrate what they're providing. We did look at, for instance, the wood structures, the timber structures that the city had put in for the rail trail. Those are relatively low cost. Those are structures that, we know how the footings are. We know structurally how those are built. But we have to consider between now and then whether or not there's any further structural design needed, depending on the item chosen, whether the footing gets adjusted because of the one that's being put in. So I wouldn't necessarily want to pin us down to one specific product, but if you want us to be a little bit more specific about what's included or what's not, like Bonnie mentioned earlier, whether or not there's some sort of a can of beer, sometimes it can be, placed up there. That might be easier to accomplish than specifying now what that the specific product will be.
Well, I'm not trying to nail down a product. Maybe you're illustrating my point, because if the range is from what you're showing here, these really kind of interesting modern things, which are nice.
Sure.
Maybe that's subjective. Some people might like them, some people won't. And the other end of the spectrum, that's still a possibility, are these country kind of style timber things, which are nice where they're located, but I don't think would work well.
Well, no,
That's the whole range of options.
Sure. Understood, and I appreciate that. Again, quite frankly, the only reason we were looking at that more recently is just because of looking at the cost of the budget and the gaps and with the fundraising that needs to be done. It's a little bit harder to go out there and ask for someone to raise or provide $50,000 to the city for one element that they're getting, a little bronze plaque or something to name on, versus $10,000 or some other number. So we haven't, we're still looking at those product options to see if, in the spectrum there, what might be possible beyond the timber element. We had just brought that up most recently as a lower cost alternative that provides a similar experience. We know how those are placed in there. People are enjoying them. So it wasn't necessarily that we want to move away from the architectural element, that sort of catalog cut, high end, architectural metal, and so forth. It's just that we have to provide flexibility for the bidding process, and we're not quite sure yet based on the budget and the estimates still being reviewed. We're doing basically several different estimates as we go along through the design, and of course with the economy being kind of crazy, trying to figure out what that number will be, what that gap will be. But it's harder for us to raise $50,000 a pop than it is to some smaller number. So that's why we're trying to look for something, even if it maybe is not the timber elements that are on the rail trail.
I still would want to see what they are.
Sure, understood. So you're looking for some more detail on the, yeah, got it.
I can imagine a range of things that would be nice. So I'm not trying to design it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something we.
Got it.
And I don't think the timber ones are nice enough. I'll say that. I think they're great where they're located. They're not bad, but I don't think
Got
they're
it.
commensurate with what you can show.
Thank you. Do you want to add?
I didn't hear any other interest in commenting. I've got one question having to do with the design of the plazas. in relationship to flooding. Is there any consideration that the plazas along the waterfront be designed other than just flat surface? I'm thinking, and I'll be the first to admit I don't understand what it's dealing with response. But flooding happens more regularly before you get sea level rise. I'm at least there, right? So I'm thinking about response to flooding in plazas where you might have a design so that the plaza absorbs, contains the water, and then there's runoff after the flood event is over. And I'm just wondering if the plazas are designed like that, and if they're not, why then?
So most of the plazas are designed to be at a higher elevation. So even with sea level rise, they would be above that flood elevation. So Ferry Wharf Plaza is high. As we saw in that section, it's about 3 feet higher than the shared use path in the existing grade at that point. So that will all remain dry with flooding. We've certainly taken into account stormwater flooding, and the whole park is being designed to properly handle stormwater.
There's an Indigenous Peoples Plaza to the far west, and then there are other areas, those are not plazas, that have, like on the other side of Central Wharf Way, that's not a plaza, that's grass area.
These areas here,
Yeah,
Is
those
that-
are planted areas.
No, wait, over toward the water.
sorry,
So
this,
it's Indigenous Peoples Plaza.
right, that's just a small circular seating, and then it's surrounded by a sort of a fire pit type feature.
Go across Central Wharf Way,
Okay,
and there's some.
This?
circles, no, on the waterfront. On the water, literally there. What's that?
oh, that's just the topograph, that's just the diagrammatic indication of the topographic change where we're bringing the grade up behind the berm. So this is, per that cross section, this is the fill that we're adding behind the berm, so that in addition to folks who are sitting on the berm today in the chairs, you would be able to sit back here and be at the same height essentially. So it's a little bit, it might be that those older sort of graphical lines that sort of look like circles might be a little bit misleading because it's a little bit more gradual. It's a little bit more sort of rectangular, sort of tapering off to the ways, the pedestrian walkways, but it's essentially a raised lawn to be commensurate with the berm across that area. Yeah, it's not like a peak or anything like that. It's like that.
It's not a paved in any way plaza.
Correct.
That's why my question didn't make sense to you, because I thought all those areas along the waterfront were going to be paved.
Oh, yeah, no, and we certainly wanted to avoid that. The one thing, like Mara mentioned earlier, was because of the frequent or routine annual disturbance of this area because of the docks. There was a concern about not having to deal with constantly at the beginning of every season, restoring the grass. So the thought was possibly having a material here. We're examining that a little bit further before we go out to the bid side of it, but we'd like to allow a little flexibility here because there's a sensitivity to possibly not using them, whether it's some sort of higher grade synthetic turf or whether it's a permeable paver or something like that, so that it doesn't have this annual issue where the Parks Department or the Waterfront Trust or some other entity is constantly dealing with the grass maintenance because the docks are coming and going from the spot.
Right, that makes
But everything else in that area would be lawn.
Okay, so let me call for public comment. If there's anyone here or online who wants to speak, this would be the chance to do it. Give us your name, your address. And,
It's not obligatory.
we would love to hear from you.
Thank you all for your, well beyond anything that we asked. We appreciate your attention to detail. It has been a 2-year plus project working on this one, so we are getting so very close, and I can assure you that we were very disappointed when we learned all the economy is definitely going to impact how many phases it's going to take us to get here, but the city council has already bonded $3 million and we've got the trust fund, so we are definitely close to having enough money to phase one, which I'm excited about because it is definitely at least going to get us back on the park. And I think that once it's built, we'll start getting everyone excited to start looking at food donations and start looking into do some of these things and other nice things to have. But right now, we are truly excited about, I'm truly excited about the infrastructure we're going to be able to get in place. So I appreciate all of the input you have on the details. We are just ready to get these plans in place from the park. So thank you very much.
Anyone else like to speak?
Not much to say other than,
You want to tell us who you are?
Oh, sorry.
You know who you are. but-
just hold on, 343 High Street. Didn't plan on attending, but given the description and the graphics and the explanation as to getting up above that berm, so that our folks, larger population can look over the water. Cars don't need views. People need views, and more green space, the better. We've got the parking garage. I think phase one, let's get it done, you know, so as a long time resident, I would support this plan. So thank you.
Is there anyone online, Andy, who would like to speak?
No, actually, Jamie Villette is actually one of the consultants who's nice enough to attend remotely tonight. So it looks like that's all we have.
So close the public comment portion of the hearing. As we've indicated earlier, we will be taking a vote tonight because we want to see plans that reflect everything you presented tonight and what we've asked in addition. So we will be continuing this, asking for a continuation to our September 21st meeting. However, to be really ready to go, I don't see any problem unless anybody else does with just looking through the decision. So we can. sort
That
of
would be
knock
helpful
that
to
one
us.
off, That one off, see if anything comes up. I do have to read parts of it into the record, but I'm gonna, this is for a site plan review. I'm gonna jump to the findings and go through those. Please bear with me, and at any point you want to stop and comment, screen that. Okay. These are the findings and the proposed decision. The proposed Market Landing Park expansion project includes parking lot reductions, a shared use path, new pedestrian walkways, and new visitor center and restroom facility structure, all of which are in harmony with the architectural style of the adjacent buildings, immediate neighborhood, and overall downtown overlay district. The proposed park expansion site design and associated grading plan have been developed to minimize obstruction of scenic views from publicly accessible locations. The proposed visitor center and restroom facility structure is modest size and is appropriately oriented in shape, minimizing obstruction of scenic views. The proposed structure includes appropriate materials and screening for any objectionable features, such as large blank walls or bathroom doors. The Massachusetts Historical Commission has issued a letter confirming that the proposal has no adverse effect on the historic properties in the vicinity. Traffic, parking, and public access. Vehicular traffic to and from the central waterfront will be reduced with smaller parking lots flanking the larger park. The city has Sasaki and VHB under contract to oversee all work within the existing activity and use limitation areas, which cover the east and west parking. The proposed development minimizes adverse impacts on neighborhood, on and off street parking, and includes incentives like a new shared use path and bicycle racks to promote alternatives to single occupant vehicles. Health, public services, and utilities. The proposed development is served with adequate water supply, wastewater systems, and solid waste disposal systems. The proposed development and overall configuration of the site includes measures to prevent pollution of surface groundwater and measures to prevent potential flooding. The proposed development minimizes adverse air quality impacts, noise, glare, and odors. Land use planning. This project is compatible with land use goals for the city. The proposed improvements will be beneficial to the public as determined already by the city council, with improved public access, the completion of outstanding perpendicular pedestrian ways to the water's edge, a completed east-west shared use path connection, i.e. Clipper City Rail Link, historical interpretive panels, sculptures, and much improved or expanded areas for public seating in close proximity to the water's edge, behind the existing earthen berm abutting the central boardwalk. Open space and environmental protection. This expansion project maximizes open space usage for the residents of Newburyport and is integrated into the natural landscape. The proposed site design minimizes adverse environmental impacts for the central waterfront and incorporates a landscape design that favors native and drought-tolerant species and avoids invasive plants. In accordance with the Massachusetts Contingency Plan and MGL 21E, a licensed site professional will be responsible for ensuring environmental compliance, e.g. handling, backfill, and/or disposal of contaminated soils. And that covers the findings. Another page and a half, hang in there, folks, thank you. This project meets the performance standards as listed in section 15H of the Newburyport zoning ordinance in the following ways. Pedestrian and vehicular access and traffic impact. The site plan shows adequate vehicular access from Merrimack Street into the parking lots on the site. All proposed walkways provide pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists safe sight distance when exiting Merrimack Street. All new walkways are fully accessible, pertaining to pitch, transitions, railings, and turning radius. The proposed site plan ensures safe interior circulation by separating pedestrian and vehicular traffic within the site. The number of existing parking spots is 252. The proposed plan includes 116 parking spots, including 5 ADA spaces, 2 electric vehicle spaces, 2 short-term parking spaces, and 4 service parking spaces. By reducing the number of parking spaces, adding 20 bicycle racks, and providing an extension of the shared use path through the site, the proposed plan will promote roadway traffic safety and traffic calming and protect the capability of state and local roads to conduct vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian traffic smoothly, safely, and efficiently. Will minimize adverse impacts to neighborhood character from excessive traffic or on-street parking. It will encourage alternatives to single occupant vehicle travel and encourage pedestrian access to the scenic, historic, recreational, and natural areas along the city of Newburyport waterfront. I'm wondering if there are changes in those numbers. For parking and
I would just note for the record, to your point, Caitlin and I will take a look at this such that the final draft of this includes the exact numbers, just to make sure we realize there might
just
be
numbers.
just the numbers. Yeah.
You include the EV capable.
We'll add that as well.
Site plan and architectural design. The existing site coverage includes large parking areas and 2 small buildings, the restroom and visitor center. The existing open space coverage is 61.7%. The proposed site coverage includes smaller parking areas and 1 consolidated visitor center with bathroom. The proposed open space coverage is 80.4%. The existing restroom is 400 square feet, and the existing visitor center is 138 square feet. These are 2 separate buildings. The new proposed building combining both programs is 925 square feet. The new proposed building is of appropriate scale, height, build, bulk, and general massing. The number and rhythm of the exterior bathroom door openings is a result of the necessary interior floor plan and have been appropriately staggered and screened with various planting. Proposed roof treatments are successful in screening rooftop equipment and solar panels. That last sentence is not included in the site plan review.
Yeah, I guess I would suggest here, and this is, I can check with Kalen, I will suggest that we actually remove that last sentence and leave entirely this determination of the planning board under the DOD. I realize that under site plan review, the planning board does have architectural criteria to some limited degree, but I agree. I think that we should take out that last sentence because you still have to have a discussion about the building and the DOD.
So as I was reading, I saw there are two separate buildings, but it's one building. Is there confusion?
Existing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's hard to think and read at the same time. Out loud, read out loud, sorry.
Actually, to that point, do you need to even say what the existing buildings are? That does make it confusing.
It is very.
Sure, we can remove the reference just to clarify. We were just as context explaining the fact, of course, that we're replacing, but we can take that out just to clarify. We'll take it out.
Go to the issue. Lighting. The proposed plan includes 33 pedestrian light pole fixtures and will match existing lighting fixtures on site. Columbus Park LED, LED, period. 14 vehicular light poles are proposed for parking lots and will match existing Vega F-157 series luminaire. Landscaping. Landscaping, yes.
I wonder whether we even need to specify the models because they may change the model. You know, could we just take out, I would hate to.
Yeah, I think something like shoebox style fixtures or something like that might be preferable.
Even just at least the
I think, I agree. I think that's preferable. I mean, Caitlin obviously was being very specific based on what was submitted, but I think you're right that it's preferable, both consistent, you know, in capturing the substance, but not being too specific. Because we have to do a public bidding and that we have to have alternates, of course, so. But they still have to meet the same standards, so, thank you.
The generic description. Landscape buffer areas have been incorporated into the proposed plan in the following areas. Parking lots, harbor master entry drive, dumpster enclosure and delivery parking. This includes a mix of evergreen and deciduous trees as well and ground cover and shrub planting. East parking lot contains 80 parking spaces and 34 trees in the parking islands and surrounding areas for a ratio of 4 trees per 10 spots. The west parking lot contains 35 parking spaces and 17 trees in the parking islands and surrounding areas for a ratio of 5 trees per 10 spots. Stormwater runoff, water quality, wetlands, and erosion control. The proposed project will include measures to prevent stormwater pollution, minimize erosion, and potential flooding, as described in the stormwater management report submitted with the stormwater management permit application on July 15, 2022. That's still relevant and updated, right?
Yeah, it is accurate. That stormwater management report has been updated. We can just revise the date in here. So we can just, whatever, July 15th, I think it might be yesterday is the date, but we can adjust that.
Environmental performance standards. The proposed plans address the development and performance standards referenced within section 11 of the Newburyport zoning ordinance. The proposed project and use will not be conducted in a manner as to create and then it's quoted from the ordinance. Utilities. The site will be served by existing utility systems, including sanitary sewer, water, and electric. The proposed visitor center and restroom facility will be connected to the existing sanitary sewer and water lines in Merrimack Street. New water mains will also be connected from Merrimack Street, Water Street to serve new wet fire hydrants for fire protection in the park and docks. Electric service to the park and docks will be provided for the existing underground electric conduits in Water Street. The existing electrical infrastructure will be relocated and raised to coordinate with the proposed park design. The visitor center and restroom facility is being designed to promote energy conservation by aligning with the city of Newburyport's net zero energy.
I'm sorry, I would suggest we add policy behind that. I think, yeah, or ordinance. Ordinance, I actually, why don't we just put ordinance right after that?
Net zero energy ordinance.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay, does that raise any questions for anybody at this point? Okay, standard conditions are standard, but I want to highlight number 3 because it's really important for the planning board, not that the others aren't. Modification to approved plan that basically says, "Can you come back to it?" In this case, I'd like to say, since the city is the applicant, any change whatsoever, please bring it back to us, or at least discuss it with the chair and the vice chair.
Understood.
From now until phase 0, phase 100 is installed,
Understood.
but at least for the site. Thank you. Standard special conditions. In addition to the foregoing standard conditions, the planning board hereby grants approval subject to the special conditions stated below. The applicant shall resubmit the stormwater management report to the city engineer and director of planning development prior to the start of construction in accordance with the email communication and requested changes noted in the city engineer's email to the Office of Planning and Development dated August 31st, 2023.
And I would note, just because we did just receive the revised stormwater management plan, it might be unnecessary for this condition to be included at your next meeting when you, if you take a vote then. So we will accordingly probably remove this once we hear back from city engineer that the Sasaki's revisions to the plan are sufficient. We're just a couple of minor tweaks, but we do want to hear from the city engineer that he's satisfied.
Well, I know he said in that memo that his report is acceptable. You want to dot the i's and cross the t's.
Well, given that you're not closing this hearing until next meeting, we can just incorporate there won't be a need then for the condition. This time, of course, we drafted the decision prior to having that, so. Yeah.
Well, that's for discussion that night. 2, the applicant shall make every effort to minimize construction impacts and temporary disruption to waterfront parking, public access to the existing park and boardwalk, and customary seasonal events throughout construction, working in coordination with the waterfront trust, parking clerk, harbor master, and other relevant parties. This site plan approval includes the physical placement of the proposed new visitor center and restaurant facility as indicated on the plans, but does not include architectural design, exterior treatment of this new structure, which shall remain subject to the board's review under the downtown overlay district special permit applied for in relation to. The proposed site level landscaping and screening depicted on the applicant's plans shall be installed to screen the proposed or anticipated restroom doors regardless of final building design. It is understood and that based upon limited funding sources, the applicant in the city proposes to construct this project in phases over the course of several years, with the first phase of primary park spaces, the shared use path, and pedestrian walkways to begin in spring 2023. Accordingly, the site plan approval shall be valid for 5 years from the date of approval unless otherwise extended by the board upon request of the applicant.
Just one comment to number 3. I mean, I suppose we could hold this in abeyance until we see what was presented at the next meeting, but if trellis is still kind of a wide open thing, I would put the trellis. I'm not trying to make it a structure because I realize that's sensitive too,
Understood.
but I would put the trellis in number 3 in a similar vein that we would need to be able to review it. So maybe it's even better to solve it and just present something, but if it's still kind of out there and
Sure.
really open.
Yeah, I
there
think
might be
we'll.
some modification number 3 to as a condition.
Yeah, we'll aim to do that. I think the one distinction I would make is it wouldn't necessarily be a DOD review. So we'd have to make it clear that maybe that we can sort it out, I guess, going forward. But I think we'll rather close out and be very clear about, what we're proposing to include here. But I just wanted to make it clear that the structural feature itself here may not necessarily become a structure that is subject to the DOD, the way that the building on Merrimack Street is.
I agree. I'm not trying to change
Okay.
the jurisdiction of it.
Yeah, right.
And it's better to resolve it. That would be
Right.
plan A. is
Right.
To resolve it.
Yep, agreed.
Plan B, if it feels like too wide open, might be to add a condition, or maybe it's a fifth condition.
Right, and we could certainly, it could require circling back to close that loop at a later point when we get more detail, but I agree, it'd be better to just be, close this out at the next meeting with very clear indication of what that will look like is sufficient for the board's satisfaction.
Otherwise, I think it's
Thank you.
Can we delete standard condition number 2? Which is a 3-year lapse, this is a special condition for a 5-year lapse.
Oh, yes, thank you. That was probably just missed on our internal review of the draft decision.
Number 2, right? Number 2, yeah.
Yep, agreed.
But I want to read all that. It was, actually going back to the performance standards. Under the site plan and architectural design, it refers to the screening between plantings. Is screening only going to be plantings, or is there going to be some kind of structural?
No, there's the structural element as well, but it's because it's part of the landscaping screening. It's not part of the building. The intention is to install all of that together.
Well, I
So,
understand, but
yeah.
That's why I was just saying, maybe we should have that sentence be a little bit, you can just say appropriately staggered the screen.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, no, agreed. Or you could say as shown in the drawings or yeah, sure. We can take that phrasing out just to be simpler.
Good, so that's cleaned up, and we will look at the items that we highlighted, make sure that they are appropriately worded before we. Is there anything else that?
I have a suggestion. Obviously, there are going to be some changes to the plan. But I think there's some areas that we've really focused on here, and I think it would be helpful to include some details, like in the detail we have earlier.
Yep.
One detail would be basically that detail, showing us how that transition and how you would be looking to show the end of the shared use path.
Yep.
That detail could also show the higher version show.
Sure.
That piece of it.
Sure.
If we need to see the rest of the screen.
Yep.
We just need it very, very small scale.
Sure.
So that's the rest of it. I think it would help to show the detail that shows the engagement. It shows both the left and the right. It's the path.
Where they meet.
We should just show how the line is going, just to have it, because it's like a 10-foot wide.
Yeah, to your point, actually, in that it may be that the plans that are submitted on revision are cover that ground, but these are 2 sheets, for instance, of the overall layout. So in the plan set, you may recall everything's kind of put into quadrants. But we could do, for instance, if you're talking about maybe a blow up of this, so yeah, where it shows the path width plus the additional area being added. Sure. Okay. Sure.
On the east lot, I think showing making it very clear what the relationship is between the bicycle parking and the service vehicle. And perhaps, if it's possible, making a slight widening of the path. So there's a bike connection from the shared use path to the bike racks. Right now you're suggesting like it's the parking lot. If we could just have that very walkway widened between the shared use path and the bike racks, it might solve some.
Okay, we'll take a look. We'll have to take a look at the grading, utilities and all that in there, but we'll see if that we can, see if we can make a little more width there.
And then having the detail showing the bike parking. Just some lower.
A blow up detail to show how that works, right? How it works. Yep.
I don't know if there's anything that's helpful to visualize it. I guess I just want to say, oh, sorry, I don't think we need to have, there's a lot that we don't need to have resubmitted. There's a lot of details, planting plans and everything that aren't changing. So, the extent that they're not changing. We just submit the revised sheets.
Yeah, we were planning on only resubmitting the drawing sheets that have been adjusted, just for clarity and simplicity and reference and so forth. So we would basically, if you're looking at OpenGov, you'll probably see at the bottom, as opposed to overlaying the original plan set, as you sometimes will see with our, as we get used to our online application, we'll put them at the bottom as a new plan set, and it'll be the plan sheets that have changed. That'll probably be the more organized way for all of us to deal with that.
Rick and everybody else, your inputs, comments.
Thank you.
I think we're ready for a motion. Please continue to, the 21st. Would like to make that motion? I'll second. And, Richard's gonna second it. And I will take roll. Make sure we're all on board with that. Alden,
Yes.
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
yes, Rick,
Yes.
Richard,
Yeah.
Bonnie, yeah. So we will see you again, both on site plan review and on,
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Talking us through the resiliency. Okay. We will move on to administrative business right now. Oops, sorry. Take a moment to approve the minutes of, what was that? August 17th. And
I already own some mistakes.
well, let's take a motion in a second and then we'll have any discussion on the two. Approval of the minutes for August 17th.
As amended. So
As amended, yes, always as amended. Thank you, Alden. And second? Okay. Now, comments, edits that you wanna think that we need to know about, other than what you may have already or might be submitting to Linda after a second meeting.
I got an email from Alden.
Yeah, and this seems to work, so it saves us time here. We used to go through excruciating details about doing it and whatever else. I don't think that's necessary in this form, but always understand that if you find there's a significant alteration or something that may be questioned, we can always discuss it at this point.
So I made a number of changes. I don't think they're really substantive. It's really more clarifying and trying to get the sense of, especially with Queen's language, trying to get the sense of what I was saying rather than just making it clear what my intention was.
This was my first set of minutes that I didn't listen to a recording
Well, you probably wouldn't have
in
heard
years.
much.
What seems like
You
years.
probably would not have heard much better on the recording than what you had in the notes. And I think the notes were, from my reading and from my listening to the recording, supplemental and helpful. So that's good. So I'll do roll call to approve the minutes. Alden,
yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
yes. Rick,
Yes.
Richard,
That's.
abstain, and Bonnie abstains as well. Okay. Updates, none from me, any from Sandy?
No, the city council will be looking at short-term rental units, on the last, day they will have available for, reaching consensus on something. So the most difficult part of that discussion of late, if you've been tracking it or, you know, is, the so-called amnesty provision or whether or not anything like that is included or not. So, they paused that discussion and we'll pick her up right there, on Monday, if you're interested in tuning in.
Why on the October 5th agenda is there communication to us about short-term rentals? Seems a little far out, and I don't know why.
I'm sorry, I haven't seen that. I'd have to take a look and see the communication itself. It might be just,
Really way after the fact.
Sure. I'll take a look with Diane and Caitlin first thing in the morning, and determine whether or not that, if that makes sense as sort of, it might be something that's just like you said, so late in the game that, it's sort of a receive and file type thing. So, to your point, so I'll take a look at that.
It seems to minor, but now that you brought it up.
Hopefully the council will have gone through the
Yeah,
adoption
they would be
process.
do or die, so. You want to take something, Rich?
Sure. Well, the ad hoc committee on waterfront, is having another meeting, and we've invited Jamie to join us for that meeting, which puts us over the limit for a quorum. So that meeting is, it's going to be next Wednesday. That meeting is going to be posted in the special planning board meeting because we have a quorum. Doesn't mean you have to come if you are not interested. But you're certainly welcome to come. And at that point, Rob and Jamie have done a lot of work on kind of conceptualizing the physical layout, massive arrangement of buildings and so forth. And so this will be something really concrete to go into the future design. So it will be very interesting. Meeting is going to be I assume, we'll see, assume it will be at the mayor's conference.
I would assume that's the case. We'll confirm tomorrow morning, and I apologize, can't tell you right at the moment, but we'll confirm tomorrow morning.
7, yeah. Well, it's going to be 7, but I think Heather said 7:30 works better for you. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, I could try for 7:15. I felt 7. I just have an appointment at, I can't remember if it's 5 or 5:30 in Amesbury that I can't rush out of.
So, let's do it 7.
So 7:30, yep.
Okay.
Be in person.
Thank you.
We'll be doing any, notes. And we use the projector in that room. Sure. So again, it's advertised as a special planning board meeting. Autumn Jane have one. But everybody wants it.
That's a small room and public.
It's a relatively small discussion, so based on an expected turnout, it should be fine. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Well, what's going on? Yeah. So, yeah, Alden, yeah.
I was just gonna say just one other thing, the Mass Open meeting law presentation that you sent around to us is tomorrow night.
Yeah, the training.
One, and the second session of that is the same night as our next meeting.
So if you want to go and ask.
If you want to go tomorrow, it's fine.
So I want to thank Rick for knowing me when I shouldn't be here. Well, I think we're moving along, so good. A nice early evening tonight. There's nothing else. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Alden.
Malden, and a second. Hey, Rick, I can say, if you don't second, I'm gonna stay here all night. I call roll for the final, time, Alden,
Yes.
Bob.
Yeah.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Richard, yes, Tommy, yes. And Heather, thank you very much for holding yourself together and joining us. We hope you feel better.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We are adjourned.